One is very much the state of the art in motor racing. It's where the most development is done. It's the area of development that then gets passed down into all the other formulae. It's noisy, it's exciting, it's brash, it's fast, and the cars are visibly very fast now. And it's dangerous, so it has a sort of glamour element as well. Real racing is Formula One.
Grand Prix racing has always been I guess a passion, if you like, a vice for me. It's something I couldn't put down. Certainly I'm success-oriented right now, but in the earlier days I was more interested in participating. I never thought that I've got to keep going because I know I'm going to win. I just thought I must keep going because I'm enjoying this, even if it's difficult. And it gives me, and always has given me, enormous pleasure and provided me with, I suppose, a lot of drive to achieve some sort of success.
It's all about winning, it's all about success, it's all about beating and being the best.
Formula One represents, for so many people, the ultimate technical platform. It provides for many multinational companies, especially the automobile manufacturers, the ability to demonstrate technical superiority. It is also the very last, or one of the last, gladiatorial sports. We make very safe cars, so accidents tend now not to leave the driver injured. But nevertheless, it's still a sport in which, if everything goes wrong, a person can lose their life, which I still think appeals to many people.
Motor racing is a very special occupation for all the people that you'll see in the pit road. Everyone does it because they like doing it, and very few of them ever leave it. It's a sort of a disease. It's the sort of disease that you can never get rid of. You die with it. The speed, the noise, the vibrations from the road itself, the smell of the cars even. There's nothing quite like it.
Formula One is the jewel in the crown of international motor racing. Each year, the top driver becomes world champion. The cars use the very latest technology. Worldwide, the television audience is measured in billions. It's a big, global business. It's not always been so healthy. Today's success has been built on over 20 years of keen competition between small teams of entrepreneurs, drivers and designers. They became the backbone of the sport. Teams like Lotus, Williams, Tyrrell, McLaren and March.
It was a fairly amateurish sort of thing. And one mustn't forget that in 1969, some races only had 13 cars on the grid. I mean, if you had a car that was a Formula One car, you could turn up and race. I mean, they'd pay you a little bit of money and you could have a go. There were only about 6 or 7 even vaguely competitive cars. And then that all changed in 1970 when March came along, because we made so many cars, the grids filled up. Our first year's budget for March, I think, was £113,000. To try and operate at the same level and with the same likelihood of success as we had in our first year, I think you'd now need about 20 million. So it's a factor of more or less 200.
We were full of the arrogance and naivety of 25-year-olds and 29-year-olds. And had we not had that arrogance, ability and naivety of not knowing really what it's about, we'd never have done it. It's actually a great advantage to have that. I mean, the people in their mid to late 20s are in a marvellous position. They just don't know how difficult life is. And they believe totally in themselves. And therefore they get out and do things. We set out to be the best. Most of the time we failed to be the best, but at least we tried. And it was that attempt to succeed which was great satisfaction and provided what success we did achieve.
March's contribution was not racing their cars themselves, but building them for others. Their first car to win a Grand Prix was driven by Jackie Stewart for Ken Tyrrell, one of the new breed of team owners.
The way to put a race-winning team together consists of several factors. The first thing the team owner has to do is to find the money to run the team. Perhaps the most important thing that he will do. Having done that, he's got to get himself a good designer, get himself good drivers, get himself a good engine, a good team of mechanics, and last but not least, a team that will work together, a team that wants to do it.
Tyrrell went on to build his own cars and continued his winning partnership with Jackie Stewart. Stewart became one of Formula One's first highly paid superstars. Talented and articulate, he was an ambassador for the newly invigorated sport.
In motor racing, I think a man is getting to the brink of life and death, perhaps beyond any other activity that man enjoys today. One tends to, in this modern society, be wrapped up in cotton wool, and it's seldom that you see the opportunity for a man to bring himself beyond society to allow these limits to be enjoyed.
Jackie Stewart gained a World Constructors title for Tyrrell and won 3 Drivers' World Championships for himself before he retired in 1973. He knew the triumph of motor racing, but he also saw the tragedy. He lobbied hard within the sport for improvements to the safety of circuits and cars. Many of his contemporaries had lost their lives or been seriously injured.
Charlton lost it on the first corner, and I hit him, and consequently spun and stalled in the middle of the track. Regazzoni came round, hit my car, and the whole lot burst into flames, and we disappeared off to the edge of the track. I pressed my fire extinguisher, put my fire out, got out of my car and looked across, and Rega was unconscious in the car. So I went over and undid his seatbelts, tried to pull him out.
You went through the fire to pull him out?
Yeah, he was sitting in the fire.
Was it a big fire?
Yeah, fairly big. And I couldn't get him out because his legs were trapped by the car, which was squashed up. And then my clothing caught fire because the petrol was leaking out of his tank. And I went away. And then they got the fire out. And he was still sitting in there, unconscious.
Mike Halewood was awarded the George Medal. Clay Regazzoni survived. Others had not been so fortunate. In 1970, Jochen Rindt became the first driver to win the World Championship posthumously. A brake shaft on his Lotus failed during practice for the Italian Grand Prix. The car hit the Armco barrier hard, tearing it out of the ground. Rindt was crushed inside the car and died.
1970 was a very bad year for Grand Prix racing. 3 world-class drivers, Jochen Rindt, Bruce McLaren, and Piers Courage were killed. They were dangerous days then, and very much because of those accidents, motor racing, Grand Prix racing did a bit of a U-turn, if you like, in terms of its attitude to safety. Those people, if you like, caused the people left behind to rapidly try, very hard indeed, to improve the safety of cars and circuits.
With those improvements, death is no longer such a frequent visitor in Formula One, even in the most violent of crashes.
A front wing was broken on the quickest point of the circuit, and I went off and I went straight in a battle one. It was nearly 300 k's, and the car caught fire. I was about 20 seconds in the fire, and of course the car was fantastic. The chassis was unbelievable. But still, it wasn't a fire, it was a very big fire, and nobody believed anymore that you still can be on the life inside. And the marshals was working very, very well, very quick. I was lucky because it was just next to the marshal, they was here quick. So usually you wouldn't be alive after an accident like this, and I was not too bad hurt. So I was quite happy.
As the popularity of the sport has grown, so it has become increasingly attractive to advertisers. Team owners have found sponsors willing to pay handsomely for exposure on their cars.
The arrival of sponsorship in '68 and then it becoming spreading through the sport certainly turned Formula One round, because instead of having sparse grids with only a couple of competitive cars, we started to get full grids with a decent collection of competitive cars. So we had proper motor racing with a full field. It then developed from there quite naturally. It was coming onto television more and more. And of course it made a big difference to motor racing, because it meant many more people and teams could run in Formula One. I can't remember a Grand Prix that I drove, and I started in '73, that didn't have at least 26 cars turn up. And about that time they put the limit on it. 26 cars was the standard Grand Prix grid. Obviously for 26 cars racing, of which half the field maybe are quite good, that's a hell of a lot better than a dozen of which maybe a third of that dozen are any good.
The two things which have really changed are, and they're very interconnected, are sponsorship and the technology. The technology has developed because it's become increasingly important to win, and there are more people doing a better job. The importance of winning, of course, is because that is what produces the income. The exposure which the sponsor of the winning team or the top 2 or 3 teams gets is so enormous now worldwide that it's worth spending a great deal of money to achieve that level of exposure. And people do. And if you have a lot of money, you have a lot of technology.
As a result of the influx of funds coming from our sponsors, Formula One has become a leading edge in automotive technology. That leading edge manifests itself in very exotic materials for the construction of the cars, very exotic materials being utilised to increase the performance and reliability of the engine, and of course braking systems, etc., etc. And you're almost looking at a mobile laboratory when you look at a Grand Prix car.
Innovation is often master, especially around corners. The challenge was to get greater adhesion between the tyres and the track, was to use aerodynamic devices to try to create a vacuum under the car, sucking it to the track. The ground effect.
True Formula One ground effects didn't really come in until the late 70s, except Bernie Ecclestone had a ground effect Brabham, which did have a fan, the famous fan car. And of course, the way that worked, they said the fan was to cool the radiator. And then that was what produced the suction. And there was immediate protest from all the other teams. And I remember Bernie.
The most elegant solution came from Lotus, the latest John Player specials. They were a perfect synthesis between sponsorship and technology. They looked like a cigarette packet, while underneath they embodied Colin Chapman's latest thinking.
We started to harness the airflow underneath the car, I suppose is the easiest way to describe it. We're the first people to have really used that airflow to increase the apparent weight of the car, which pushes it onto the ground, which improves the grip of the tyres.
Colin Chapman took an idea from a young engineer and said, yes, I think this can work, and then put all the resources and backing and help needed to actually make it work and bring it to fruition. And this wasn't overnight. This was over a period of 2-3 years before we really had a good handle on the whole technology.
Chapman's #1 driver was Mario Andretti.
Obviously, he was discovering more and more about it as we were going on, because then I would discover things driving, and then he, on the engineering side, would progress and, oh, this to be achieved, that, reshaping and so on and so forth. So it was in its infancy, but that's where it started.
Lotus was very lucky in having Mario Andretti as the #1 driver, because he brought a depth of motor racing experience, not just in Grand Prix racing, but also from Indianapolis racing in the States. It's very high speed, the margins are very small, and Andretti brought all that experience, plus a maturity, plus all the competitive elements that are needed in a top driver to Lotus at just the time when we needed it most.
The years of patient work paid off in 1978. Teams without ground effects technology were caught on the hop. Andretti won 6 Grand Prix. His teammate, Ronnie Peterson, took 2 more. Lotus won the Constructors' title. Andretti became world champion. To catch Lotus, the other teams had to invest in the new technology. Lotus, meanwhile, pursued new, even more innovative ideas, but they proved costly failures. The Williams team, on the other hand, refined the basic idea of ground effects to a peak of efficiency to give Alan Jones the World Championship in 1980.
Ground effects, of course, were a very interesting technical development, technically and aerodynamically, and certainly made the cars go a lot faster. But of course, it was so effective that it made the cars virtually undrivable for the drivers. It stuck them down on the road to such an extent that cornering speeds went up alarmingly, which was a safety problem if they came off, or if a skirt got stuck and suddenly you didn't have your ground effects working properly because of some mechanical deficiency, then suddenly you had no grip. But above all, it was the G-forces and the loads to operate the cars were becoming too big for the drivers. So it wasn't a test of driving skill, it was becoming a test of physical strength as to whether the driver could actually drive it or not. So for those reasons, they had to go.
By 1981, FISA, the sports... But as one technical revolution came to an end, so another was just getting into its stride. Turbocharging. Overshadowed by the success of the small teams with their ground effects, the big manufacturers responded with a huge increase in engine power. Renault had introduced the first turbocharged Formula One car as early as 1977. The turbocharger forced fuel into the engine under pressure. It was expensive technology which took time to develop, but by 1979, the Renaults were on the front row of the grid.
Turbocharging came into Formula One because the regulations had been written in such a way as to allow turbocharging, supercharging, whatever you like to call it. And Renault was the first major manufacturer in the turbocharging. They basically spotted the fact that with turbocharging you could get a lot more power out of an engine half the cubic capacity of a normally aspirated.
Any doubts about turbocharging were swept aside in 1979 at the French Grand Prix. In a dramatic race, Jean-Pierre Jabouille and René Arnoux came first and third for Renault, after a fierce battle with Gilles Villeneuve in a Ferrari.
He's got second position. He's got second position. He's through. They bang wheels. He's off. He's off. And he's back again. René Arnoux off the last lap. And he's back. He's in second position. Villeneuve is second in the Ferrari. Down to third position goes Arnoux.
Stripped of the advantage which ground effects had given them in the 1980s, the smaller teams used turbocharged engines which had been developed by Honda, BMW and Porsche. Ferrari also adopted the new technology. In 1982, they became the first company to win the Constructors' Championship in a turbocharged car.
I think it was wonderful, the turbocharging era. I feel very privileged that I started in ground effects, went through to the turbo engines and then came out of them, non-ground effects, and now back to the aspirated engines. I've been full circle in Formula One and it's been fascinating. I think the great thing was, from the point of view of driving, is that you could press a button on the steering wheel and you could get, within 1 second, 100 more horsepower to overtake. And that was a lot of fun. Except if the guy in front pressed his button a split second before you and then you didn't overtake him again, he just went down the straight faster.
Turbos gave drivers more power, but at a price. At full boost, they were very thirsty. Using too much fuel led to some embarrassing moments. Turbos provided some spectacular racing, especially when they went wrong. But they'd become too expensive. In 1989, FISA banned them. In the quest to stay one step ahead of the opposition, the Formula One car has been through many revolutions.
McLaren pioneered many things over the last 10 years. I suppose the most significant area would be the use of composite materials, and in particular, of course, carbon fibre. That was an interesting period, especially the few months leading to the first chassis being produced. Research into the material saw us going into a partnership with Hercules Aerospace in Salt Lake City, and it was in fact a combination of their technology and ours that saw the first MP4 turn a wheel at the Long Beach Grand Prix.
Carbon fibre composites are light and very strong. They're used to make a far more rigid chassis. Today's Formula One car is built using a variety of space-age materials. The designers try to achieve the best combination of lightness and strength. This has helped to protect the driver even in some of the worst high-speed crashes. Derek Warwick continued the race in a spare car. The Formula One car is the result of relentless competition. To attract sponsorship, a team has to win. To win, a team has to be one step ahead all the time.
You're constantly looking around at the opposition, and the thing about Formula One is that the opposition is very visible. You see it every 10 days. Probably on average, and as soon as somebody comes out with something that's better than anybody else, everybody knows about it, and you have to respond. And a Grand Prix team is at its best in the middle of the season when it's responding to changes. That's when you see the place really humming and you see people performing at their limit.
Grand Prix racing is really a 365-day-year business. An engineer, designer might say it's mid-season when he has to make up his mind about the type of car and its design parameters he's going to come up with for the following season. And in fact, I say mid-season, but it has to be earlier because the cars these days are so not complicated to make, but the standards of engineering and technology that's embodied in them are so high that you don't produce them quickly like you used to do 10 or 20 years ago. They take maybe, we're talking of a 9-month design and gestation period.
The aerodynamics is particularly complex, and in some ways at least as complex, maybe a little more complex than an aircraft aerodynamics because of the proximity of the ground and big interaction between the car, particularly the underside, and the ground. It really is a low-flying aircraft.
It's got to be balanced over 200 miles an hour. If you've got a slow corner like we race on with Formula One circuits, it's got to be balanced at 60 miles an hour. So you start talking compromise. Then that's why you have adjustable anti-roll bars, and that's why the setup from track to track, corner to corner can change. I mean, it's a big management job, and next year with next year's car, it can be even worse.
We have projects going on, electronically controlled suspension and transmissions and differentials and wind tunnel programs, which can be very expensive.
Money, technology, mechanics, designers, drivers, all play their part in winning. And once in a while, everything comes together to create something very special.
There was one prime example in 1988 where all the ingredients came together superbly, and that was with McLaren, who won 15 out of 16 races, which I have to say is an astonishing record, which I sincerely hope was never ever achieved again unless we do it. And it was put together by the correct assembly of those primary ingredients at the right time and in the right way, and almost flawlessly. And that's what it takes to win world championships.
1988 was, for us, a unique season. It was a season that, in all honesty, we weren't able to savour until it was over. However, it was a season that was almost perfect, and that perfection came from a variety of reasons.
The most important factor in that was the Honda engine. That combined with the fact that it was the end of the turbocharging era, so other people had moved their attention much more to developing their Atmo engines. Honda kept going flat out right up till the end, and that gave them a really big advantage. That gave them the luxury to be able to be well organised without pressure. For instance, you can take a little bit more time over your pit stops, you can be a bit more conservative with your tyre choice, you can be conservative even with the weight of the car. It was very well run, they had good personnel, it was very efficient, as McLarens have always been since Ron Dennis got hold of them and got the thing moving.
We introduced some team strategies that, of course, we've carried with us into the latter years that just seemed to click with everything else that we were doing. And we had just a formidable season. We probably had the two best drivers in the world at the time, in Alan Prost and Ayrton Senna. And of course, there was great rivalry between them. But that rivalry, of course, was a positive rivalry and produced results that will probably stand forever.